webcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, and thanks for joining today's webinar looking at securing privileged accounts across any compute environment. My name is Shona Bradshaw. I'm delighted to be joined today by Fernando Perez from CyberArk, one of their senior security engineers who will take you through the bulk of today's presentation. So just a little bit of an agenda for today's session. I'll give a very brief intro to Bytes before looking at the situation analysis on the risk of privilege in the cloud and privilege attacks. I'll then introduce Fernando, who will talk to you about the privilege root risk and the best practices and solutions that businesses can put in place to protect their assets across the cloud and on-premise against privileged and advanced attacks. He'll then give an introduction to privileged account security from CyberArk before we do a Q&A at the end. So a bit of housekeeping for today's session. Attendee lines will be on mute throughout today's presentation, but we will have a Q&A at the end, so please do post those questions via the chat or questions box. We will be keeping today's discussions to strategy and solutions rather than commercials on this session, and we will be recording today's webinar at the end as well. Lastly, there is a feedback survey at the end, so please do post out those feedback to us so that we can ensure these sessions continue to be relevant to yourselves. So a very brief intro to Bytes. Who are Bytes? So we're the security specialist reseller within the Bytes Electronics Group, and what we aim to marry is the agility and insight and very personal approach you would expect from the smallest of agile resellers, with the stability and resources that you can expect from working with the largest groups. A core part of what we do is the technical side of the business. Over 50% of our staff are technical, and that allows us to offer a variety of technical services, including support around the technology solutions that we recommend to customers. Across our remit is the whole spectrum of information security, from the next generation firewall, content and data security, through to privileged account management, access control, mobile security, and cloud security, which is the subject of today's webinar. Within all of those areas, what Bytes aim to bring to the table is that consultant and technology expertise. So we have an in-house direct escalation engineer support team, either business hours or 24/7. We offer varied market and technology product updates, security state reviews, strategy development, technology mapping, and in-house project planning and delivery. So that's enough about us, as many of you do know us already. Why are we speaking to accounts about privilege and also around privilege specifically in the cloud? So there is a limited scope in privileged attack protections from legacy methods and legacy controls. At the same time, privilege is a really prominent attack vector. Almost all advanced attacks of the last few years have used in some shape or form privileged accounts and privileged assets in order to wreak the most damage, infiltrate accounts, get access controls, and make significant network and data loss, data theft possible. The volume and impact of attacks is increasing. That's not going to change. And at the same time, we see, a new myriad of data breach legislation coming from the EU with the advent of GDPR, which extends the remit of the data processor into their cloud and their cloud providers. So it's no longer sufficient to pass the buck over to cloud providers when we're looking at the responsibility for data. So understanding the latest tools, tactics, and strategies to protect those very powerful accounts in your organization, those accounts where you have the most risk of being able to exfiltrate data and wreak havoc on the network, is increasingly critical. And that's what we're talking to businesses about today. So all that it remains for me today was to introduce Fernando. He's a specialist engineer for CyberArk. We've been working with CyberArk for many years. They are the global leader in privileged account security. And they have worked over the last 18 to 24 months to really look at how they can offer businesses the same controls and the same confidence in the extent of their privileged account security in the cloud, be that private or public cloud, as on-premise. So Fernando's joining me today to share their viewpoint on how businesses can protect public and private clouds, how they can ensure that essentially the keys to your kingdom as an information security manager are locked down. So I'm just going to hand over to Fernando. He'll take you through the rest of today's presentation, and I'll pop back on at the end to answer your questions and pose those to Fernando. Over to Fernando.
Thank you, Shauna. So I'm going to share my screen at the moment. Let me know if you can see it, and I'll just get cracked on. All good?
I can indeed. I'll
Perfect.
mute myself off now. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So a little bit about me, without getting too much into it. I'm a principal sales engineer at CyberArk. So my role is looking after prospects and customers from my pre-sales point of view. So I help them out through demonstrations, proof of concepts. I do quite a bit of seminars, conferences, webinars, etc. And I'll be running today's webinar for you about security in the cloud. So we'll run through the agenda that's on screen for the next 40 to 45 minutes. I'll try and keep it short and sweet. I realize it's the end of the year, and maybe not everyone's in the mood for a long session, but hopefully this one will be relevant for you. So we'll be looking at an introduction and of cloud basics, talk about the expanded attack surface that the cloud represents, how important it is to secure the management console of the cloud. And then we'll be looking at specific cloud unique requirements and how to address them, as well as some examples of customer implementations that we've seen at CyberArk. And then we'll come up with a few takeaways, 6 takeaways at the end of this call. Hopefully we'll have some time for questions and answers at the very end of the call. Sorry, I don't know what's going on with my screen. I'll just go back to that. There we go. All right, so let's get started. 1 second, just messing with me. Right. So whether you embrace cloud or not, ensuring the security of the cloud and DevOps initiative is becoming very, very key for most organizations. Our goal for this session is to bring awareness of the security implications. Now, we're seeing a big uptake in our business as companies develop an interest in adopting cloud. We're seeing much more awareness of cloud from security and IT leaders specifically. And they know they need to be proactive in ensuring the security of their cloud and DevOps initiatives as they are taking place in their organization. So when we talk about cloud, I wanted to make a brief distinction. So on the left-hand side, we've got your software as a service platforms like Salesforce, Office 365, etc. These are your commercial applications, and this is not going to be the focus of today's conversation. And then on the right-hand side, we've got your infrastructure as a service and platform as a service, which are about enterprise running their applications in the cloud infrastructure, and that's what we'll talk about today. So software as a service, or SaaS, provides access to data and how we manage the access to these portals. Now, some of the challenges associated with this access are your usual suspect that we also see in other places in your organization. So your on-prem infrastructure, a lot of shared passwords, which are typically written down, very rarely change as well. And a lot of lack of accountability, as in who has access to these privileged credentials, how they're being used. Now, this can lead to several implications. For example, the proliferation of these credentials, which is typically followed by lateral movement techniques for malicious insider or outsiders, as well as undetected or unmonitored access for long periods that can lead to a lot of corporate data being breached. And brand damage, etc. So we need to look into securing the credentials, these credentials within a digital vault, limit or stop the risk of that lateral movement, and detect in real time when these attacks are happening. So let's have a look at an expanded attack surface when we talk about the cloud. So does cloud create a bigger attack surface? Well, the answer is yes. If we take a step back, cloud is something of a different beast. To begin with, there's traditionally a far less clarity of weaknesses and who's responsible for security. You don't need IT to spin up a new infrastructure instance in the cloud. Anyone with a credit card and access to AWS can set up a new environment. Obviously, the risk is higher when we're talking about corporate environments. And also, you think about the risk and the exposure. If we have a look at three examples of the recent times, in a recent US Black Hat conference, there was a paper presented on how easy it is to do account jumping between the different Amazon accounts, and it also showed the methodology of how attackers could jump back to the corporate on-prem data center when the cloud data center had been compromised. In another example, a hosting company, CodeSpace, was put out of business after a DDoS or denial of service attack, which resulted in a hacker getting access to the control panel, which wiped out the entire customer's data. Hackers also set up bots to scan these code repositories, such as GitHub, to find inadvertently placed access keys like AWS or S3 keys. S3 meaning simple storage service credentials from Amazon Web Services. And then they use these S3 APIs to get access to the data and potentially spin up some service. In this particular example, the attacker set up servers to mine Bitcoins, which resulted in, as you can imagine, the company getting a huge bill from AWS. AWS is just one of the big players, so we'll hear more examples from AWS, and we'll work very closely with their security architects. Now, the traditional way a hacker will try to compromise an organization, or the old way, is to try and compromise as many machines in a short amount of time as possible. Sometimes they'll target users with phishing attacks via email and by social engineering attacks. But when we're talking about cloud computing, when that comes into the mix, it offers attackers a new and powerful ways to steal and compromise credentials. For instance, the management console provides access to far more resources than the old way to hack a system did. This management console is incredibly powerful and holds the keys to the kingdom, or your cloud kingdom. It lets you do setup of resource allocation, spin up and down instances, manage roles, delegate authority, and also handles the billing and controls the overall security of your cloud environment. The key is that the first step is to secure that initial access. In this example that's on screen at the moment, the CyberArk red team, who runs penetration testing engagements in our customers and prospects, they ran on this attack on a large financial institution. Well, they asked us to do it, just to see how far we get. So the red team was very quickly able to compromise an IT laptop with a simple phishing email. That IT laptop had, fortunately, the local API keys that were used to provision the entire organization's AWS infrastructure. And from there, they were able to clone the servers and attach our own storage packets and clone the data in this customer's AWS service. So a simple hacking story that started with a compromise of the AWS management console. So there's a quote from Gartner that highlights the importance of privileged account management or security when moving to the cloud. At CyberArk, we recently announced the integration between our Discovery and Audit, or DNA tool, and the AWS Inspector, which pulls data and findings from AWS, such as the number of high-severity findings on Amazon EC2 instances, and is pulled into a single CyberArk dashboard to alert on potential vulnerabilities in AWS, which helps security teams visualize and prioritize risk mitigation. A key takeaway here is that the management console is a key point for vulnerability. So let's have a look at that, management console access. Using public cloud vendor, you access your entire cloud infrastructure through a simple management console. Typically, that's the case for AWS, for Azure, etc. Now, this management console, as we mentioned earlier, will allow you to set up that resource allocation, compute your instances in the cloud, determine which regions the applications run, zones of security. You can set it up to delegate authority, and it also handles the billing. Basically, you control your cloud assets and infrastructure from this console. So we're going to be looking at securing that initial access to the management console with CyberArk as well. You achieve this with a secure digital vault, and CyberArk has an out-of-the-box integration to handle this. So what we'll do is initially store the privileged credentials, your AWS, for example, secret user or password code to access the management console into the CyberArk vault. We then apply strict access control and workflows for users to be able to access that credential, and we rotate that credential according to policy on a frequent basis. The user that's been given access to those credentials to access the management console will select the account and connect via the CyberArk proxy server or privileged session manager. Now, these out-of-the-box integration with AWS means that we automatically log into the admin interface of AWS, for instance, with role-based access controls to do whatever it is needed, and that whole session will be fully isolated and recorded for later monitoring and reviewing. As you can see, this is extremely simple, and there's no excuse not to do it. We can even securely rotate that credential, as I mentioned, as our integration with AWS APIs enables us to do so. You can secure credentials used by humans, but you can also secure credentials used by applications. And we'll talk about that in a bit more detail later on as well. If we move down the agenda, let's have a look at the cloud unique requirements and how to address them next. Now we've got the management console secure. Let's get into the management of the actual cloud environment. Your cloud vendor, AWS Azure, that is the infrastructure as a service vendor or IaaS vendor. They do a lot to secure the security of the cloud infrastructure, the physical network layer. These infrastructure as a service vendors point out that cloud security is though a shared responsibility. You as the application owner are responsible for securing for the security of essentially anything above the hypervisor or equivalent layer running in the cloud, the operating systems, the applications, the users, etc. So the enterprise is the one that needs to configure the services provided by the cloud vendor and take care of that security. Securing applications, as in, for example, customer database, payroll, HR, etc., means securing the privileged credentials that these applications use. So let's get a bit more into the application-to-application use cases. Now, these credentials are more often than not hard-coded or embedded in applications and scripts. There is a vulnerability that malicious individuals, whether insiders or outsiders, are aware of. And we can also address it with CyberArk's either Application Identity Manager or CyberArk Conjure offerings. With these solutions, we can ensure these credentials are stored securely in a central repository or digital vault where they are frequently rotated and where access control is strict and accounted for. We can provide a native integration to secure credentials in automation and orchestration tools, for example, Puppet, Chef, Jenkins, Ansible, containerization providers as Docker, for example, etc. And we can also automate provision of newly created admin accounts into the CyberArk digital vault. So this is an example that a lot of you would be quite familiar with, and it's very common. So it's a little bit too alarm, but it is not good practice. So you've got your cloud apps and assets on the left hand side. You've got your enterprise resources they need to access on the right-hand side. And as I said, more often than not, you'll have somewhere within the application or script a piece of code or a couple of lines that will say username so-and-so, password so-and-so, completely hard-coded and very often in clear text, and a call to action, for example, connect to a database with that host, for example, to display a list of results by querying a database on a website. So what we'll do with CyberArk is look into getting rid of those credentials that are hard-coded in those scripts and applications. We store them securely in a digital vault, and we replace that former credential with a piece of code, a programmatic manner of retrieving that credential from the vault when the application needs it. And we've got different ways to do this depending on the use case. Now, there's a very important reason for this. One of the core businesses in cloud is that you can do on-demand computing, or otherwise known as elasticity. As you require more resources in the cloud to get your job done, you're instantaneously scaling up and getting more service working on your job. As that job completes or there's less need, you can scale that down. This really enables a whole on-demand computing environment, meaning you only pay for what you use, as in assign resources on the fly. In the cloud, this is all done automatically, and there's various automations tools to do this. But when you look outside the public cloud offering, we have other solutions like orchestration tools in the DevOps world, as we mentioned earlier, Puppet, Chef, or Ansible, for example, or even container-based solutions such as Docker, which facilitate that on-demand services. These tools also work to automatically scale in an environment. You may use these tools if you're using one or multiple cloud environments. They also work in on-prem environments. When these apps are created and launched, they're going to need privileges and credentials to access their resources. While the automation tools can provide the credentials, the question is how are they secured? When a new app instance is created or when it is dynamically scaled, you want to immediately secure these permissions and credentials in a secure digital vault. You can use CyberArk APIs to achieve this, for example. Then use a CyberArk Application Identity Manager or CyberArk Conjure to retrieve the credentials securely when the application needs it. And putting these integrations in place will help you solve that problem. The apps that we see in the DevOps world are used to create your infrastructure, playbooks, cookbooks, Jenkins pipelines, etc. So on screen there's an example of a continuous integration, continuous delivery or CI/CD pipeline, which is typical of DevOps methodology. And if we break it down, this pipeline, just to go through a couple of examples. First, we start with the coding section on the left-hand side, where developers are creating the code. Then they may upload this code to a repository, such as GitHub, for example, and that's going to need some sort of credential to be able to do that. Typically a privileged credential. Then the next phase will be, for example, a CI tool like Jenkins that will pick up the code and run a series of test cases against the code in an automated manner to make sure that no bugs or issues are present in the code. This will also need credentials that we'll be looking to secure with CyberArk. As the next phase, you might have another CI tool that may be building artifacts. And then you have your CD tools like Puppet or Chef, for example, that pick up these artifacts and push them to production or AWS or Azure, etc. Credentials are needed along the way in the CI/CD pipeline, and apps need to have a way to remember them, but we need to make sure that they're not hard-coded and easy to find for malicious individuals. The other challenge in this DevOps pipeline is the different personas that play a role within it. I know DevOps is a fantastic tool or a methodology from a code delivery point of view, up to 50 times the speed in terms of improvement. Now, unfortunately, the last people you tend to involve in that is the security guys, which sit at the very end of the pipeline usually. And once the code has been developed and tested and gotten ready for production, you then start applying security in a retrospective manner, which is probably not a very efficient way to do it. So we need to start applying the security controls from the beginning to the end of the project in a way that is also easy for the users, for example, the developers, who shouldn't need to know that there is a credential stored anywhere. And this is something that we can achieve as well with CyberArk Conjure, for example. The last trend we are seeing when adopting the cloud is that a significant number of organizations do not just use one cloud provider. Business flexibility will play a big role in this, or acquiring new businesses or different geography locations, for example, will be a part of this trend. Now, Gartner recently published a report that said that only 50% use a single cloud vendor, whereas 60% use anywhere between 2 to 5 cloud vendors. So organizations need to future-proof for this very likely situation and expect multiple cloud environments down the line. So we're seeing the same thing at CyberArk, a mix of public, private, and hybrid environments, and this is presenting a challenge for many organizations and CISOs. Now, several large enterprises are making commitments of this sort, and they want, as a best practice, security policies across the entire environment, using only one single platform, whether that is for human users or for applications. Now, the takeaway here is that this can be done regardless of the compute environment. Now, a quick summary of this section. So we've learned so far from key challenges in terms of securing the cloud. First of all, would be access to data management or admin console, securing the applications and assets that access resources in the cloud or on-prem. The need for elastic computing, creation of the instances and managing those credentials. The DevOps pipeline, which is becoming very prevalent in today's methodologies, and the multiple cloud environments. And we want to make sure that we do all that with enterprise-wide security policies. Now, in our next section, we're going to have a look at some customers' use case examples. And these are going to be 3 examples in particular. We've got one example of a complete migration of a company's infrastructure to the cloud, including the CyberArk Vault and CyberArk components. The second would be an integration between AWS auto-scaling and CyberArk for dynamic management of privileged accounts, one of those examples that we talked about earlier. And the third one will be an organization that wanted to use any compute environment regardless of geography. So very quickly, in the first example, we've got this architecture. This belongs to a mid-size European wealth management company who decided to shut all data centers and move to the cloud. So now they have a full deployment in the cloud. And their approach was to move everything they had, all the applications, to the cloud, including managing the privileges for the cloud from the cloud as well. So that meant moving CyberArk to the cloud as well. So talk about resilience. CyberArk can actually help with this resilience and redundancy. We've got data centers offerings. For example, we have disaster recovery options, high availability options. So we want to make sure that we have that in place along with load balancers. Now this is fully deployed and operational, and it's been quite a successful use case. The next one would be this auto-scaling or dynamic use case for AWS Cloud in particular. Now auto-scaling, this company wanted auto-scaling without the implication of having an infrastructure hit. Now the integration between AWS auto-scaling and the Vault to manage those instances was part of the solution, as and when created to reduce the cost of the organization. And this integration used as the CyberArk REST APIs, which allowed for privileged credentials to immediately be stored in the Vault as the application instances were launched. This met the demands on the business for security in the cloud, and it's been another successful implementation for CyberArk as well in the cloud. And the last one, this was a global enterprise who wanted to use any compute environment regardless of geography. They had a mixed environment or hybrid environment, and they leverage cloud DevOps as well, and they wanted to secure this. So we've managed to do this with a single privilege account security or PaaS platform. So now these are 3 great examples of customer initiatives where we've played a significant role, and our solution has been flexible and proven to meet these use cases. Now our platform, support, and engineering teams can help to meet these emerging use cases as well as others. So if we do a quick summary of what we covered so far, these are the 6 takeaways I wanted to present before we move on to the Q&A section. The first one is make sure that you're adopting enterprise-wide security policies. So make sure that you consider current and emerging compute and development environments, and that they all have the same policy across them. Lock down your infrastructure as a service management or admin console, as in your AWS or Azure management console, both where there is that's for a human access or for non-human access, for example, APIs, scripts. The third one would be to secure the credentials for applications, scripts, and other assets that are running in the cloud or on-prem by eliminating those hard-coded credentials and the use of shared credentials. The fourth would be to automate securing the privileges or the privilege accounts when we talk about elastic computing and auto-scaling, as in immediately managing new privilege credentials in the cloud as and when they're necessary or created. The fifth point would be to apply consistent security policies across development environments, including DevOps tools and DevOps pipeline, as well as on-prem, production. And the last one would be to include multiple cloud environments in your planning assumptions. So just before we get into the Q&A, I just wanted to highlight that while at CyberArk we focus on privileged accounts. Security is really a team sport. This is just a quick snapshot or an overview of our security partnerships, which also include cloud service providers. So it's called the C-Cube Alliance, which we launched in 2016 and is available on our website if you want to have a look at the different integration points or the different privileged accounts that we manage. So in blue, we have these validated security or secure solutions, so accounts, privileged accounts or systems that we can rotate credentials on out of the box, as well as connect to transparently and create isolated and privileged sessions. And in green, these are the security partners that are committed to implementing privileged account security best practices. So we either enhance the solution or they enhance our solution. And there's plenty of joint solution briefs and videos for you to have a look at as well, and integration guides online. So with that, I guess we can Shona, we can move into Q&A. There any questions from anyone? And if not, then I'll leave some information on the screen as well, so you can follow up questions with Ellen Davies, who is our channel account executive for the UK and Ireland, and her contact details are on the screen as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Fernando. Hopefully you can hear me fine. So I just want to encourage anyone in the audience to pop any questions regarding any of the presentations today, or anything you'd like to know further about CyberArk privileged account management or best practices. I'll give it a few minutes to just allow for anyone to type any questions in as those occur to you. I just want to take the opportunity to thank Fernando very much for his time while you potentially put those questions through. Just obviously really fantastic and concise overview of the best practices and strategies that you can use to protect privilege and sort of scene setting of why that's particularly important. And also thank everyone else for their time in coming along today and dialing in. As I said, we have recorded today's session, so that will be shared post-webinar with you, so that you can review that at your leisure and share that insight with within your wider business. I just encourage you to fill in the short feedback form at the end. So I don't have any further questions coming over on the questions pop up at the moment. So I'm just going to wrap up now. Thanking everyone for the time in attending this morning. And thanks very much to Fernando for his detailed presentation. Any questions that occur to you post webinar, please do feed them back via your Bytes account manager, or indeed via Ellen, the contacts that Fernando has shared at the end of the webinar. Many thanks everyone, and good morning.